All right, so good. We're all here. Thanks everybody for joining us this evening. My name is Renata Whitty, and as the chair of the National PTA Programs Committee, I'd like to welcome you tonight to the Social Media and Healthy Minds webinar. You know, this conversation is for families and for youth and will be moderated by Paul Wilson, a National PTA Youth Board member and chair of the National PTA's Youth Engagement Committee. Welcome, Paul. We are so pleased to host this very important conversation this evening, as May is Mental Health Awareness Month. And before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the members of the National PTA Programs Subcommittee, which is the Health and Safety Subcommittee. Heather from Texas, Barry from Utah, Cheryl from Montana, Jackie from Massachusetts, Karen from Texas, and Jamie from Nebraska. I really hope that from this webinar, you come away with ways that families can support healthy social media habits for youth and also incorporate mental wellness practices while navigating the digital world. I invite the audience to please submit any questions you have in the Q&A, and we will get to as many of those questions as we can during the course of the webinar. Again, thank you, Paul, for moderating this very important discussion, and I will now turn it over to you.
Thanks, Renata. Welcome, everyone. We're so excited to have you here with us tonight for this important topic. My name is Paul Wilson, and I'm the chair of the National PTA's Youth Engagement Committee and also a youth member on the National Board of Directors. I've been involved with PTA for a little bit, traveling around with my mom. And previously, I had the opportunity to be at Michigan PTA convention, and it was a very exciting moment for me. So I'm excited to do more with PTA with facilitating this very important discussion. So we all know that social media is a great tool to help us stay connected to friends and family members and provide moments for fun and inspiration and ways to share more information, stories, milestones, and express ourselves. But we also know navigating our relationships with social media can be challenging. We are so fortunate to have three expert panelists with us this evening to help unpack how we can all support healthy social media habits and incorporate wellness practices while helping youth navigate the digital world. I'd like to start off by introducing our panelists. First, we have Carrie Neal, National PTA's PTA Connected Ambassador. Carrie Neal is a past member of the National PTA Board of Directors and currently serves as the chair of the Leadership Committee. A dedicated advocate for children, families, and teachers, Carrie has also served in her local PTA for 9 years. Wow. In multiple board roles and has chaired her local PTA's event, literacy appreciation and membership committees. In her role as PTA Connected Ambassador, Carrie works with PTA leaders and parents to support and promote digital safety and wellness through National PTA's Connected program. Thank you for being here, Carrie.
Thank you for having me.
Next, we have Shatan Berry. Shatan serves as National PTA's Healthy Minds Ambassador. Shatan has been involved with PTA for the past 17 years. Wow. She has been president of Michigan PTA and served as the chair of National PTA's Nominating and Leadership Recruitment Committee. Shatan currently serves on the National PTA Board of Directors and chairs the Strategic Vision Committee. As National PTA's Healthy Minds Ambassador, Shatan works with PTAs and families to ensure that mental health is an everyday priority through PTA's Healthy Mind program. We're excited to have you here, Shatan.
Thank you.
And last but certainly not least, we're thrilled to have Dr. Amy Grosso participate in this conversation. Dr. Grosso is the Director of Behavioral Health Services at Round Rock ISD, a large suburban district with 48,000 students. Wow. Dr. Grosso completed her PhD in counseling and counselor education at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. Dr. Grosso created the Behavioral Health and Services Department for Round Rock ISD, including the hiring and oversight of a team of social workers providing Tier 3 services to students and families. Dr. Grosso also serves on the National Chapter Leadership Council of American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. She co-authored the book School-Wide Collaboration for Transformative Social Emotional Learning. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Grosso.
So happy to be here. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to start off with our first question, and I'm going to actually direct this one to Carrie first. Okay, let's dive in. I like everyone to answer this. Okay, I don't know why I'm doing this. I like everyone to answer this, but let's begin with Carrie. As you have been connecting with PTA leaders and parents across the country as PTA Connected Ambassador, what have you been hearing as it relates to the state of youth relationships with social media?
Thank you for that question, Paul. And first, I just want to thank you for being willing to facilitate this conversation with a whole bunch of adults. I appreciate that. And also to National PTA for the opportunity to talk about this. It's extremely timely that we have this conversation. And it's equally as important than when we're talking about youth that we really are hearing and listening from them about what they think, what they feel, and how they view social media. So that's what I'm going to share a bit here, is that the opportunity to be ambassador means that I get to go across the country and hear directly from teens and students about how they feel about social media. And what I'm hearing is that they use words to describe their social media usage and their relationship with it as it's a way to express themselves, like what I might be aging myself, but it's like a digital scrapbook. They use it to learn, to be creative, to have fun, be independent, and even to develop their own identity and voices. Some concerns that they've brought up, really, I applaud them for being this vulnerable, because it's usually in a room full of other parents and caregivers, but they admit that, you know, they might need some help with understanding self-regulating the amount of time that they're on screens. They know it might be a lot, but how the tools in which to help self-regulate might not be there. And they look to adults to maybe either mirror that behavior or talk to them about that. And another piece that I think all parents and caregivers will love is that teens and students really do want to know what the rules are. They want to understand where the line is in the sand. What are those concrete consequences if they do violate those rules? And they want to be part of that discussion. And I think that that's so important. Rather than just setting rules and consequences, they want to understand them and talk about them. And they also would like to see adults have their own limits and consequences for when they may be using social media in ways that might not be supporting mental health. And so I think those are all great lessons from some just really, really amazing students.
And if I can just chime in there too, Carrie, I loved you talk about like the students want us to talk to them about it. I think, you know, dating myself too, like we didn't grow up with this. And so I think as parents, a lot of times we're scared of it. So when we're scared of something, we just say, don't do it. Because we only hear and see the fear side, how horrible it is. And we know with our kids, when we just say, don't do it, that is such a one-sided conversation and it doesn't really help them. You know, and, you know, even one of the questions I saw are like, what are the apps I should know about? And, you know, that's a great opportunity to have a discussion with your child. You know, it's not just us telling them what apps there are, but like, how do we have that ongoing discussion of what new is out there? Like, maybe I don't understand the newest app, but do I ask my child, can you show me how it works? You know, because I think sometimes our kids like to be the expert in that way too, and that we're not shaming them for them or judging them for it. Instead saying, I have no clue about this, help me understand. And then together we can put, what are those boundaries? What are those regulations? And as you said too, adults, we don't manage our social media well either. So I really want us to, we judge kids so harshly, and I'm like, most of their adult examples are really bad. And so we all have to have this discussion together.
And I think, Amy, to add to that, I think what we have to think about is with social media and how it affects mental health is sometimes our young people are expressing themselves or who they want to be or who they desire to be on social media. And as a parent, if you come in and you shut that down, you are shutting down the part of their creativity. You're shutting down their ability to be able to share themselves. You're shutting down their creativity. And then a lot of times we as parents wonder where the disconnect happened. Where was the point where my child stopped talking to me? Well, it was at those moments when I became dismissive about what was important to them. And so how do we make sure that we are hearing them, engaging them, regulating them, making sure that they know, hey, after 10, you can't be on social media. We're going to have these conversations. And I think that's the reason why the PTA Healthy Minds program is so important and the PTA Connected program is so important.
Great responses, great responses. So I'm going to tackle the next question, and this one is going to actually go to Ms. Shatan. There are many misconceptions when it comes to youth mental health and social media usage. For some parents, there's a concern and a stigma around social media use having a negative impact on mental health. Can you share a little bit about what is a misconception versus what is related?
I should unmute. Okay, so I think the first thing that we need to think about is and talk about is that social media is actually a tool, right? It's a tool that's used to connect. And I think that sometimes as adults, we talk about social media as if it's this thing over here that's not connected with everything else. And that's part of understanding social media. I think the other part of it is, as adults, you can't change what you don't acknowledge. So if you don't acknowledge that you don't know, if you don't acknowledge that you're scared of it, if don't acknowledge that you're unfamiliar with it, then we kind of just shut things down when actually we should be trying to engage and have conversations more from there. I think that a lot of the misconceptions is that, social media is causing all of these things. Well, there may be a correlation to some, it may not always be a causation to others, but I think we just have to be open because social media isn't going anywhere. As much as we want to, we think they're going to keep creating new social media platforms, that they're going to continue to kick us as adults off. Facebook was the thing. Now kids are like, Facebook, no, you're over 40, you're on Facebook, except for Carrie. But it's those type of things that we have to just continue to talk about. And so I think as we have these conversations of how do we connect, how can we use social media to help our families? How can we use social media to connect with our young people, connect our families, connect with our communities? I think those are those conversations that need to happen to dispel some of those, the misconceptions and how it relates to mental health. I think the other part of it is listening to our young people. And listening to understand and not just listening to respond. Because a lot of times if we're listening, we're paying attention, we're actively engaged in the conversations that they're having, then we can help navigate them through those experiences because that's our job as parents, right? It's our jobs to help navigate them through those experiences. And Dr. Amy, I think you probably have a little bit to add to that too, right?
Yeah, and you were doing great. I loved what you talked about. That, it's not just, I think we like to blame social media for, there is rising rates of mental health concerns in our students. Like that's the reality. I know you'll have a webinar coming up next week with the CDC. But I think it's really easy for us as adults to just blame it all on one thing instead of realizing that our children live in very complex worlds right now. They have experienced things that we never did. They experienced a pandemic. I mean, we all did. And so I think it is way too simplistic just to blame it on one thing instead of understanding the depth of what's going on. And, I love how you say there's times when social media can be good for our mental well-being. I have a 9-year-old. I never imagined when he was in kindergarten and COVID happened that he would be on any type of social media, right? Because that was unheard of for a kindergartner. But he did get on kids' Facebook Messenger to stay connected with friends when he was isolated. And I think we have to understand that there is an element of connection they have online that maybe we don't as adults because we didn't grow up doing that. When we say it's better to talk in person, well, that's because that's how we grew up. And so I think there's a lot of, our minds like to simplify things, even though they're really highly complex. And just as you said, if we just shut it down, our kids will never talk to us, and they won't talk to us about social media, but they're very much not going to talk about their mental well-being if it's struggling, because we're not a safe person. Because if they think we're only going to blame it because, like, well, you should just get off whatever app or whatever you're doing, then we have totally dismissed the complexity of what they're dealing with and what mental health and struggling with your mental health is really about.
Wow. All right. Those are great answers. And we're going to move on to the next question because that's great conversation right there. But this next question is actually going to be for you, Dr. Grosso. What trends are you seeing in your school district when it comes to social media and mental health for students? Is there anything that you are seeing in particular, that is trending in a positive direction?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. I think we as the adults are getting a little smarter about how we approach these conversations and realizing what our role is and what it's not. I think we're finally starting to move the way, like, just don't do it, but then how do we help educate our students on different things? You know, some of our middle schools, because they realized self-regulation during the day was a problem, so they put some boundaries in place, right? Like during instruction time, nobody has their cell phones out. It's interesting that the people who had the most problem with that were the parents, not the students, because the parents were like, what if I have to get a hold of my student? And so that's where I think we're seeing a funny thing happening, that the parents are struggling with the limit of access. The kids were okay with it. So I think that in itself is, we're teaching what are those regulations, right? What are the boundaries? We're going to do that for you because we know it's hard for you to do that yourself. I also think we're providing just more explaining what's going on, and we can talk about the dangers without saying you should just get off of it. We've had a lot of conversations that if our kids, all they hear is, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it, you're not supposed to be on it. Well, if they snuck and got on it and somebody is being creepy or crossing those boundaries, they are not going to tell a safe adult, because then they're going to think they're just going to get punished. And so, you know, it's really important that we have those teachable moments and we explain to our students why we put the boundaries that we do on them, that it's not just because we know better and we're the adults, but part of our job is to educate them for an increasing digital world. And that's helping them develop those skills that they're going to need.
And Dr. Grosso, you said something about they're not going to tell us. And I think we can't stranger danger social media. You know, the worst thing that we did to young people is talk about stranger danger. We talked about, oh, you know, we made them fearful of the scary person down the street, but we didn't talk to them about the scary person that may be in their home. And so we can't do that with social media. We can't talk to them about, oh, it's a stranger, oh, it's horrible, and we're not giving them that. So either we can be the parents and we can be the adults, the caregivers, and we can help shape them and mold them and guide them through this system, or we're going to just leave them to the wolves. And so I think no parent wants to lead their child into the darkness. We want to be there to help navigate them and help them navigate through that process together.
But
And to that,
just one, no, you go, Carrie, you go.
I was going to say something that also that kids are bringing up, what that I hear versus maybe what adults and caregivers are, is that we're not talking the same language. So for example, Shaitan mentioned the word stranger. We hear that as adults or caregivers, and we have a very clear definition of what we identify as a friend, an acquaintance, a coworker, and a stranger, a dangerous stranger and a not dangerous stranger, right? If you ask your child in your home or the kids in your home, how do you know someone on social media is your friend? How would you describe that? What we hear at National PTA is that they might not have ever met this person in real life. I almost use air quotes, which would have made me feel so old, sorry, but in real life. But they would consider a person they may be chatting with while they play a video game. They may have been speaking to this person solely on social media for 6 months and truly would consider them a very close friend. And so I think that it's about us all making sure when we're talking to our kids, are we speaking the same language? When I say stranger, do you understand what I mean by that? And vice versa. When my kids say friend, do I understand what they mean? And that only can happen from just asking, what do you think when you hear the word stranger?
Well, it's that two-way communication, right? I think so often we very first approach social media as a one-way, right? Like, don't do it. This is what you do. And how do we do that? And even going back to the school, even pre-COVID, that seems like 50 years ago. But one of our middle schools asked me to come and do like some 20-minute assemblies with their students on social media because they were having some issues, and really took it in the way of helping them understand their intent versus their impact. You know, because I think sometimes we forget too, our kids, their brains aren't fully developed. And we ask them to think way far into the future. Like, if you put that online, you're not going to get a job. And they're like, I'm 12. Instead of, you know, we walked through some really interesting things. Like, I pulled some articles about things that had happened online, and we talked about, was that the intent that these students had? And they're like, no, not at all. And I'm like, right, they didn't mean for it to happen, but the impact they still have to be responsible for. And for me, that was a good life lesson, not just for social media and stuff, but anything. And so I think we have to walk them through that. And remember, their brains are not an adult brain, and it's not their fault. It's not. Like, our brains were the same way when we were that age.
Okay, so we're gonna move on to the next question. I'm sorry, I got lost in the conversation. So this next question is for Carrie. What types of questions can a parent or caregiver ask to better understand their child's online habits and presence?
That is a great question, and it's probably one of the most popular questions we get besides how do we restrict, or what's a good amount of time someone should, my kids should be online. So let's just start with preparing for those conversations before we dive in. And I'm going to preface and say, I know everything that Shaitan and Amy and I are saying seems like we're saying it really nonchalantly, but let's be real. This is really hard. This is hard for all of us. It's hard for them. It's hard for us. Parenting is hard. We didn't grow up with this technology. And so, like Dr. Amy mentioned, that we just don't have this experience to pull from to help us in our parenting journey. So my best advice here is that we really need to be brave. It is, the more uncomfortable we are as parents to talk to our kids about it is a key indicator that it is something that we need to talk about. Right. So be brave. Definitely try not to have these conversations in reaction to a behavior. These need to be things that are a lot more casual, open, and friendly, that involve that two-way conversation. Being vulnerable, that's very hard for parents, especially for me. I can speak from experience. I always feel like I need to know all the answers and know everything and project perfection so that my kids can see that. But really, the best life lessons tend to be learned from those who are sharing vulnerably and honestly, and being flexible. So talking to your kids about your fears, like Dr. Amy mentioned, their brains aren't developed. So we have all these fears that they do not understand. And actually, a lot of times kids think that you believe that you don't trust them. They don't understand when you say you're scared or anything like that, any big emotions that adults have. They truly take it upon themselves and think that it's something about them, when that's usually not the case. And it comes from a place of mutual respect, that you're understanding before you have those conversations. As an adult, what am I really trying to get out of this conversation? What is my goal? So I know that's, I said that quickly and acted like that's easy. I know it's hard. So thinking that through. And then at National PTA, we really respect and believe that every household knows what's best for them. You do know your kids better than you think you do, even though I know you're timid to talk about this or scared. But we also know that you need support and resources to help you through this journey. So we believe the best approach with youth and social media and really all things digital is really approaching it in 4 ways: being as positive as you possibly can, definitely being proactive, being really practical, right? Don't judge what your neighbors or your kids' friends are doing. Do what's best for your home and feel empowered to do that, and have it be ongoing. This isn't just something that happens one time. It is constantly something to go back to, which I know is so mentally exhausting, but we just have to keep going back to that. But more specifically, just asking open-ended questions, giving them that voice, being ready to listen. You should know if you're talking more than your child is, maybe listening more, I think, and giving them an opportunity to express themselves is really best here in these situations. But like, who are you following on your social accounts and why? What do you like about those creators? Try to follow those creators as well, letting your kids know you're going to do that, and talking about, hey, I saw this great video that they posted. I loved what they did. Getting involved that way. Also understanding the difference between passive screen time and active screen time. 5 years ago, the experts were saying, 2 hours only, and not understanding the difference between creating content and being creative and learning versus just what we call like doom scrolling, where you're just taking that information in. Talk to your kids about that. What do they think is appropriate amounts of time? I think you'll be pleasantly surprised by that. And then what do they think are good habits? What do you think are good habits for me? How have you felt if I've asked you to hold on 1 minute while I look at something on my phone? Referencing it to yourself and using yourself as an example is a great way to get the conversation started. And then what would you do if? And I really love those scenarios of, what would you do if your friend was being bullied online? Who would you talk to about that first, and why? And then post-conversation exploring and being vulnerable and open to, if they say they wouldn't come to you, maybe thinking about, what can I do to change that relationship with them so that I am a trusted adult they come to? Because things will happen. Our sphere of influence as our kids get older expands, and we have to create these two-way conversations so that when and if something ever happens, you will be that first person they can come to because you've created that relationship of trust.
Carrie, I loved how you talked about too that it's very dependent on your family and your child. And even if you have more than one child, it would depend, and I think that's where I think sometimes as adults, we want things very simple and concrete. Just like I said, we want everything simplified, and it's a complex issue. Parenting is complex, right? And so there's no manual for how you do the first 3 years. There's not going to be one on how you handle social media. But what there is that you can trust yourself to know your child. As my kid has gotten older, screen time, what he does on the screen changes because he's changing. And some of it is me noticing his behavior, right? Like, is there a point where too much and I notice a decrease in his behavior or interest in other things? So then that's when as a parent, that we have a conversation about it. And so always that dialogue. I also want to say, when you talk to your kids too, I think sometimes as adults, we're like, let's sit down and have a conversation. Well, some kids that I love to talk. You're shaking your head no. Sometimes driving in the car because you're not face to face. Once again, with my son, when my husband reads to him and then I put him to bed, and when we're laying by him in the dark, is when all the deep-seated questions of life come up, because we're not looking at each other. Others might be easy through writing. So can you journal from one to the other? Or let's be honest, maybe some do better with texting. And we don't need to judge that. We need to understand what their communication style is and what's the easiest way for them to be vulnerable. Because just like Carrie was saying, like, we want to be the person they come to, but if we force them in a communication style they're not comfortable with, they're not going to come to us. But if we give them other ways, such as, you can text me, or maybe you like to text through emoji or whatever, but I've got to learn your communication style so you feel safe in a way to talk with me.
And I think I love both of the points that you guys, all of the points that both of you made. And I think something else that we have to think about is that our young people, I love them because they see stuff in a way that we don't as adults. And they will call you out for being a hypocrite. They'll call you out for, you'll get a bro in a minute, like, bro, you doing too much, right? And so that's where that is, because as James Baldwin said, I can't believe what you say because I see what you do. And our young people are that. So as a parent, if you're with your phone scrolling through TikTok telling your child to get off of TikTok, I don't know if that's really going to be a great conversation for you to be able to have in that moment. Or you can sit down and say, how do you want to communicate this way? And I know that we, a lot of us, well, I'm dating myself again, but, we watched The Cosby Show, we watched Family Ties, and we saw them have these family meetings. that may not work for your family. You may not be able to say, come down and we're going to have a family meeting and think everybody's going to be ready to talk about how Theo want to be in the, big world. No, that may not be the case. So how do you find it? I tell people all the time to talk to your kids in the car about mental health, social media, because unless they tuck and roll, you got them, right? Like they got to stay there. They can't leave. So how do we make sure that we're engaging in those conversations with them at their level in a way that they feel like it's conversational and they're not being lectured, they don't feel like they've done something wrong. I wouldn't want to come downstairs to a family meeting because I'm thinking something's wrong. So I think it's just being open and having those open conversations and staying in that posture of I'm here for you no matter what.
Those are some very profound points. As a young person, I can relate to a lot of things that you all said for that last question. So I really appreciate that. Okay, so this next question is actually for all of you. No one specific. The question is, how do we reduce concern and stigma around social media?
Sure. It's another great question. I think we've all sort of touched on it in multiple ways throughout this conversation. But just to be real and call it out, I think we've all seen Dateline episodes. We've all read news articles or have a friend of a friend whose child had a negative experience around social media. So that fear is real. And it does deserve to be acknowledged and does deserve to be called out. And it is okay to have those feelings, right? That there's nothing wrong with you if you feel that way. That doesn't mean that you're outdated if you feel that way. And it also doesn't mean you can't talk about it if you feel that way. So just acknowledging that it's okay, I think is really, really important. But also just the constantly going back to talking about it. Things get easier when we talk about them. I can't imagine things getting better if we just put our heads in the sand. So this is one of those things where we just have to keep talking about it with friends, with your PTA groups, with your schools, with your family, and most importantly, with your kids. So I'm hopeful that with time and not expecting perfection, right? Because I certainly don't think I've had a single conversation with my kids that I think went exactly the way I expected or even maybe wanted, but they all were conversations that were great. And so not putting that pressure on yourself, I think is really important. And then my last piece of advice on this is use them. Use those apps. Get in the whatever type of device you have, get in and download some apps and just try them out. A lot of fear comes from the unknown. And the best way to approach that I can find is just trying new apps out and playing around with them. So for example, I had a very hard time using an app called Discord that started out as a gaming platform chat, and it's really evolved to more than that. And they're one of our national partners. I didn't really like the way the interface looked. I felt very old, but I just kept going back and using it because my kids were using it. And I wanted to understand how to use it. And it took me some time, and they showed me how to use it a lot, and they did a lot of eye rolls and laughing at me, but it's all part of that experience. So using those apps, I think is critical to helping make you feel better about your kids using them too.
Carrie, I love that too, because I always see, like, even like my son who's 9, like he's not afraid he's going to break technology. And I think those of us who didn't grow up with it, even a new app, I'm like, there's this fear that I'm going to mess it up. And so I think, as you're saying, the more we do it, the more we get over that fear. Because I mean, I'm like, how does he already have this figured out? And then it's because he's willing to just try it out, where we censor ourselves as adults. And I do have to thank National PTA so much for even just having this discussion and all the resources. Because as Carrie said, the more we talk about it, and not just to our kids, we talk about it with our partner or our other family members, not just our kids and our friends, that we don't just focus on the scary articles. It's very easy because that's all that the news, they don't tell us the great stories that happen with social media because it doesn't really get many clicks. And so I think, searching out and really even examining the good it is in your child's life, like seeing, like during COVID, how did it help them connect? How does it help them learn new things? And so explore what things that they would have never explored before. We can be connected around the world, which is pretty fascinating to me. No longer is it a pen pal that you have to wait 3 months to get a letter back from. And so do we allow ourselves to think of how it has drastically changed us in such a great way that our kids can connect with people who are not like them at all, so that they can learn and have a better perspective in life?
And I think you made a great point about that of connecting, because now in jobs we're using social media to connect. Now, or using some type of tool. People use Slack, they use Teams, they use these things that are really, if you think about it, it's some form of social media, right? Because you're chatting, you're moving back and forth with people. And I love what you said about we only hear the negative. And if we only talk about the negative, then that's what's going to rise to the top when we need to talk about the positive. There are apps and social media platforms that our young people are engaged in creating and doing beautiful things on, and they're changing the world through these apps, but we're only hearing about this small percentage of things that happen. And so one of the tools that I'll plug as the Healthy Minds Ambassador is that we do have a family action plan on our PTA.org/Healthy Minds page. And this family action plan, I tell parents to use it for Healthy Minds, but you can also use it for digital safety, because it's just a plan to say, this is what we're going to do as a family. We're going to keep our social media to this amount. We're going to, if there's an issue, we're going to have this conversation here. If this happens, we're going to do this. So it's a contract with your family to say, what are we going to do? How are we going to handle these situations? What's going to happen if this happens? So it's a if then else. And then when everybody's engaged in the process, when everybody creates it, when everyone in the family, from the smallest to the oldest, participates, now we have something that everybody can enjoy. Everybody feels a part of. They feel empowered to talk about it. They feel empowered to call you out, because our babies will call us out in a minute. Mom, you said you weren't going to be on Instagram this week. What you doing? Kind of thing, right? So that's how we're going to change this narrative, is by identifying and what our young people are doing, encouraging them to talk to us about it, and then respecting them and their autonomy and their individuality and their creativity and their authenticity to do these things. And so I think it's a respect thing. And as parents, we're fearful, but we have to allow them to be in those spaces. And we want to be there side by side with them and not looking through the window, trying to see what they're doing.
But we have to be honest too, like without the technology that does lead to social media, this would not be happening, where we're all over the United States. 10 years ago, this wouldn't happen. We would be meeting just in our small school PTA, talking about this, where now it's across the nation that we're able to have these conversations. And so I think sometimes as adults too, we have to reflect on how social media has helped us. How has it helped us connect with family that we would never even see because they live halfway across the country or in a different, even halfway across the world? And so I think we have to reflect on how it has changed our individual lives for the better too. Instead of, and that's that mind shift, right? Like our minds are made towards a negativity bias where we automatically think good automatically. And so I think with social media and our kids, we have to force ourselves to do that. So is it even listing like all the positive things that it can do for us and our children and our family, instead of always just going to it's bad, it's bad, it's bad.
Great talking points as always. We have one more question for you all, and it's directed towards all of you. What are some of the best resources to guide parents and caregivers in supporting their children in creating healthy online habits?
So this is the time that I get to plug these amazing resources that we have at National PTA. So if you go to pta.org/connected, it highlights the 4 programs that we have that are built for families. And so the first is the Smart Talk, which is in partnership with Norton, which is facilitates a full family discussion. And it's a step-by-step guided process that is age specific to the children that you have in your home. And it gives you actual questions for you and your children to ask each other. And at the end of that conversation, you get a family contract of how are we going to approach the values of technology and our relationship with it in our home. So it's a great tool. There's also Build Up and Belong, which is partnership with Discord. And so that program is for middle schoolers and high schoolers, and it is for families and those age children to talk about scenario-based questions online. So it's about raising awareness about digital citizenship and your digital footprint, and helping to talk about those situations of, like I mentioned before, what would you do if you saw your friend being bullied online, and how would you handle that and why? But it gives you those guided questions. And at the end of that, you've had a long discussion about really understanding each other's approach and view of digital citizenship for both kids and adults. Our third is Be Internet Awesome, which is in partnership with Google and YouTube. That is for parents and caregivers to facilitate discussions with themselves. And it helps just understanding what are safeguards that are out there with technology that so I can understand how to use it better and how to be safe, and how to talk to my kids about what's safe information for them to share online. So I think that one's super important as well. And then our new partnership with AT&T, we have a program called Ready Tech Go, which is all about helping elementary and middle school families understand when their child is screen ready, how to evaluate that. There's actually a screen readiness quiz. And what I love about that is that if at the end of the quiz that your child takes about being screen ready, if the answer ends up being leaning towards maybe they need to wait, it helps you have that conversation of how they can prepare to be screen ready. So it's not just, no, you can't have screens. It's, let's talk about how we can get you to a place where you can be screen ready. And what does that mean? And how can we build that responsibility together? Again, conversation based, but it helps me as a parent understand, okay, I'm looking for guardrails here, but it helps my child understand, how can I be responsible with technology so I can earn that right to have that. And I think that those are all just really, really important. So again, it's pta.org/connected.
I'll jump in with a small plug about pta.org/healthy minds, because Carrie talked about all of the great connected resources. And so I think the Healthy Minds page will be able to provide you with some resources about having those conversations. And I'll guide you more towards like the social emotional learning tab that we have there, because there's resources about self-awareness. We need our kids to be self-aware online. Their self-management, how to manage themselves, while they're in this process, and also relationship skills, all skills that not just young people need, but adults need as well, but all skills that's needed to navigate the social media world as well as our real world right out here. So I think comboing those resources from PTA Connected with Healthy Minds is really going to help us bridge this gap, have better conversations with our young people about social media. Dr. Grosso?
I want to say I love both of those, what y'all were talking about, because I think too often we talk about social media and then all of the rest of life, when social media is part of life now, and we can't separate the two. Sometimes we're like, oh, social media is causing my kid to be depressed, and mine is, maybe your kid's depressed and that's why they're staying on it, and mindless scrolling is because they are so numb. So I think it's really critical that we understand those, so that we understand mental health just as much as we understand social media, the digital world. If you're just looking for a book, and it's a little bit older, but it really helped me completely understand and change my philosophy of how to talk about these things for kids. It's called Social Media Wellness for Tweens and Teens. It's by Anna Holmeyen. She has a great website too, if you just Google Social Media Wellness for Teens and Tweens. But it really is this idea of flipping the conversation to a dialogue, what we've talked about today completely. She also really dives into a lot of the monitoring type things that happen for kids and on apps and things. That's for the parents to monitor the child, and we're not teaching our kids how to monitor themselves, how they can look out for that. And I think that's such an important thing. I think as parents, we do want a big brother and being like, I've got to watch them, I have to catch everything, but we're not setting them up for success once they're out of our control, or once they are smart enough to figure out how to turn those controls off. Let's admit it, they're going to totally figure it out without us, because they're way smarter digitally than we are. So it's getting before that. And it's what we talked about. It's this ongoing open conversation It's not a one and done. It's not check. We talked about social media and digital safety and we're done. And I always say maybe the first conversation, your kid's not really into it. That's okay. I do a lot of training just with mental health, and I'm always like, you want to say, are you leaving the conversation with the door open or the door slammed shut? And if you approach it with judgment and condemnation, or like, you just don't want to talk about this, that door slams shut and it's really hard to open it again. And so realizing it's going to take a while and you building that trust in this area, that don't give up on it and keep doing it and finding the way your kid wants to communicate.
Well, I just want to say that you all hit some very good points. I hope that everyone in attendance actually learned something, because even I learned something, and I'm a young person. So I do hope that you all learned something, and I really hope that you use those tools that they have attached, because we can all do better in our personal life, especially when it comes down to social media. So I just want to say thank you so much for joining us, Ms. Carey, Ms. Shatan, and Dr. Grosso. And thank you for your dedication to supporting and improving the safety and mental well-being of our nation's children and youth. At PTA, we remain committed to making a difference for the education, health, safety, and well-being of every child and ensuring that every child reaches their full potential. We also remain committed to supporting critical school and family needs and sharing important information, resources, and expertise to ensure their families and schools have the best tools to support every student's learning, development, and success. Please continue to follow National PTA for more information and resources. You can visit pta.org/connected and pta.org/healthy minds for resources on this topic to support your family. And please join us again at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on May 18th, Mental Health Action Day, for a virtual town hall on creating safe, supportive learning environments for all students. The town hall will feature conversations with experts, advocates, and parent leaders on the state of adolescent mental health efforts to foster student well-being and how parent leaders can champion school-based mental health in their communities. I apologize. Excuse me. I apologize. I'm stumbling. Forgive me. It will be streamed live on National PTA's Facebook page and Twitter and YouTube accounts. Thank you. And thank you again, Ms. Carey, Ms. Shatan, and Dr. Grosso for joining us. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you so much, Paul. I so appreciate you taking this task on and leading the discussion. And I wanted to make sure that our audience has an opportunity to ask any questions. I will tell you, panelists, I took a lot of notes, and I wanted just to kind of highlight some of the things that you talked about. Shatan, you mentioned how we can use social media to connect with youth. And I think sometimes we tend to look at social media in a very narrow kind of way, but not really a way to start a conversation. And I love that you said that we should listen to understand and not just to respond. Really powerful words. And then you talked about the family contract too, where everyone agrees for common goals and behaviors. Is there anything that you wanted to add as we close up?
Oh, I love the family action plan, and I also love the family discussion guide that's at pta.org/healthy minds, because it's really helping parents navigate those conversations about, you can take the family action plan and make it around any topic that you want. You can create those guidelines, but the discussion guide actually helps parents have those conversations about mental health issues that they may or may not be as comfortable as having those conversations. And I think Carey talked about it a little earlier. You don't have to be the expert. You don't have to be secure. It's okay to be vulnerable. Our young people want that. They need to see how you as the adult navigate being vulnerable. They need to see how you as the adult navigate your anxiety, navigate your stress, because we teach our young people those things, whether we do it intentionally or unintentionally. So you can either be, Otha Thornton, who's a past national PTA president, used to say all the time, you can either be at the table or on the menu. So what's the decision that we want to make here? Do we want to be at the table with our young people having these conversations, or we're on the menu and we have no idea what's going on? So I think we have to take a more active role and step up and do the uncomfortable, because change only happens out of being uncomfortable. Nothing great comes from being comfortable.
Thank you so much, Shatan. Dr. Amy, again, thank you so much for being here. So my takeaways from your conversation was really to learn the communication style of the youth. And especially when you have multiple children, just because they are all in the same family doesn't mean that they interact and communicate in the same way. And I wanted to dive a little deeper on what you had mentioned about learning with your child, especially like with different apps, and being a little nervous about that and maybe not being able to get into it and understanding, but using your child as a guide. Can you just talk about that a little more, please?
I think anytime our kids can teach us something, we form a stronger trust there. I think naturally they think we have it all figured out, which we don't at all. And I think when we let them see that, like Carrie even talked about it, like our vulnerabilities, when they see it, and it seems opposite, right? I think we only feel like if we know everything, our kids will trust us. And it's actually the opposite. It's when they don't think we have it figured out that they trust us even more, because we're not these perfect beings that are just judging them. Instead, we're real people that are struggling just like they are. We just happen to have a few more years than they do. And so I do think I keep thinking too, as we've been talking, one of the favorite things my son and we love to do is we watch puppy videos on TikTok, right? And it started with him, but it really started for me too, that when I'm struggling, it is a great coping strategy. And so do we allow our kids to help us understand how social media can be positive? Do we want to learn not just how to use apps, but do we learn how to use this digital world for good? And I think they can show us that. And we might not be interested in something. I'm not a big gaming person at all. And my son is obsessed with Minecraft, like lots of kids are. And I'm never going to completely understand Minecraft. But when he wants to show me something on it, I better stop and watch, even if it's like a roller coaster that takes 10 minutes to finish. Because if I shut him down, you know what? In 10 years, he might not talk to me about something that's happening online that he really needs to talk to me about. And so I think it's those little things that we don't think make a big difference, but those are the big differences. It's the everyday little things of how we interact with our children in the digital world together that will allow them to come to us when maybe they are struggling, or maybe one of those scary things that we're afraid of happening maybe is happening, but now it's not as scary because they know they can talk to us.
Oh, Renata, you're still muted.
Oh, and you all missed everything wonderful that I said. So Dr. Amy, you talked about vulnerability, and Carrie, you did as well. And that's something that's really hard for adults to be that way. But the common language, you talked about common language between adults and children. And I think we tend to forget that we're using the same words, but they have different meanings based on our life experiences. So can you just remind us a little bit again about that importance of the vulnerability and common language?
Sure. And I think it's important to note that we shouldn't correct them. Like I use the example of what do we define as a stranger or a friend. It is okay for there to be differences. What is happening that's important for that conversation is that they now understand when you use that word, what do you mean? And now I understand as the adult, when my child uses that word, I now understand what they mean. And it seems really obvious. We probably do that already in our work lives, but a lot of those communication skills that we use as adults in our professional lives or at PTA meetings and things like that also still apply in our household and can be used there. And so the vulnerability piece is really, I think, the hardest thing, especially for me at least. I'll be vulnerable and admit that. Especially when I have 3 girls, especially with my oldest, because I joke with her that she's like my experimental child because she has to go through all of the firsts. And she was the last one age-wise to get a screen before the other kids, because at that time, I really felt like no screens for a long time. And then as I had more children, things eased up a bit, to be realistic. But then I realized that I wasn't understanding when she was talking about posting something or sharing something. To me, that seemed what I understand as from Facebook, because that's where my social media experience comes from. But she was talking about apps that I had never heard of. And I immediately reacted with, you're not supposed to have those apps. And we took her phone away. And for some families and for some households, that might be the resort that you need to go to. That might be the consequence, and that might work well for you. So I encourage you to explore what's best for you. It wasn't the best decision in our household for our family at the time, but you don't know what you don't know. I learned from that because I learned she was smart enough to use a different tablet to get all of the same things. So vulnerability and admitting that you're going to make mistakes. We haven't had perfect conversations. We know that, but we just keep coming back to the table. And vulnerability of knowing. So a great example I use is the fear of missing out, FOMO. I do think that that is a real thing. It does exist and adults deal with it, but you don't really talk about it because there's these weird social mores that you don't want to seem desperate or whatever. But I readily admit to my children, I know you weren't invited to the sleepover and you felt hurt. You know what? I see clean houses on TikTok, or I see my friends going out to dinner and I might not have been invited, or my house doesn't look as pristine as that. And it kind of hurts a little bit. But then I talk about, how do I cope with that? I remember friendships don't mean that they're just based off of these superficial things, and that friendships are deeper than that. And we talk about being included and what does that feel like? And it leads to a lot of eye-opening conversations that they actually teach me a lot about. And so that kind of vulnerability of sharing when you've either made mistakes online, I think we've all been there late at night scrolling and maybe made a comment on a page that we maybe shouldn't have. And so admitting that, I think, is so critical, so that they feel like they can share when they've made mistakes, because they'll happen and we need to be prepared for them. But at least you want them to come to you with that.
Thank you, Carrie. Absolutely, absolutely true. I do want to let everybody know that this webinar is being recorded, and the link will be sent out to all of the registrants and made available. You'll be seeing something on posting by National PTA. Again, thank you so much on behalf of the Programs Committee and the Health and Safety Subcommittee to Carrie, Shatan, and Dr. Amy and Paul, our wonderful moderator. We really appreciate your time, and thank you to the audience for joining us this evening. We hope we've answered some of your questions, addressed some of your concerns, and we look forward to working with you. Make sure to register for the National PTA Convention. There will be a lot of opportunities for follow-up discussions like this. Thank you and have a good evening.